this is Esther with Discover Your Origins. In this video, I'm going to talk about the 1890 U.S. Census. There's been quite a lot written about the 1890 U.S. Census, and so I'm not going to go into every aspect of it. But the important thing to note about this census is that this is the only U.S. Census that has been lost due to fire. The census was stored at the Commerce Building in 1921, and there was a fire that started, and so multiple fire engines responded, and they just poured water on the building for hours. The records were stored in a lower level that was supposed to be fire protected, but there was some areas where water was able to leak through. And so most of the records weren't actually destroyed by fire. It was mostly smoke damage and water damage. So unfortunately, most of the records which were stored on the lower parts of the shelves were lost, and the records which were on upper parts of the shelves did survive. Unfortunately, not very many survived, but there were some that did survive. So let me go to the National Archives. There's this really great article there that kind of goes into the fire and what happened, and also some of the unique features of the census. The census, and I'll show you an example of what the census forms themselves look like. But this was the first census in which a tabulation machine was used to do the count. And the tabulation machine required the information be transferred to punch cards, which then ran through the machine and did the count. So you could consider that the 1890 U.S. Census was really the first to be counted by almost like a computer. Even though maybe it wasn't considered exactly a computer, it functioned in many ways like a computer. And there was some controversy related to the use of the tabulation machine because the count was different than what was expected. Previously, most of the census years showed about a 30 to 35% population increase, and in this case, there was not as big of an increase, which I'll show in a minute here. So I recommend this article to kind of go over the history of the 1890 census and the tragedy that happened, and you can see pictures of the room where the records had been kept and the damage done. So really interesting. The National Archives does have a frequently asked questions page that you can look at, and it goes over which of the census sheets were preserved based on location, and also some of the special schedules were preserved, and so those can be really useful. So you can see here up at the top there were some population schedules, schedules of Union Civil War veterans and their widows, the Oklahoma territorial schedules, list of selected Delaware African Americans, statistics of Lutheran congregations, and then just general statistical information for the entire United States. So thankfully we have some of that. The census has been digitized, so it is available for viewing on Family Search, and I'll show you an example here in a minute. But if you would like to see if your ancestor is in one of the preserved records, there is a list here on the 1890 U.S. Census page of which areas survived. And so you can see roll 1 is Perryville, beat number 11, Perry County, Alabama. So just one tiny bit of Alabama survived. And then you can look and see that there was just little bits from other places that survived. So the special schedules, especially the one for the Union Civil War veterans, it is arranged by state, and you can look and see if if your ancestor was a Civil War veteran, to see if they're listed in the special schedule. The territorial census survived, which is good, and then some of these other ones which are interesting and provide some really interesting insights. The statistical reports are interesting. They did survive, and so you can get a really good look at the state of the economy, the manufacturing, industry, social statistics, and that kind of thing. So these special schedules will provide interesting statistical information, but it doesn't really provide a lot as far as genealogical research, other than to give an idea of what life might have been like in the United States at that time. The Family Search Research Wiki also has some information. So it gives a list of the questions that were asked. And really the questions are very similar to previous census years. There was some additional questions related to mortgages and whether you rented or owned, whether you worked on a rented property for someone else, some things like that. Also, another unique feature of this census is it asked for your street address, and so in some cases you may be able to actually locate where your ancestor was living if you can find them. The amount of people in the surviving record only amounts to about 6,000 individuals. So the chance that you'll find your ancestor in the 1890 census is low, but it's still worth a try, especially if you know your ancestor is in one of the areas in which the records survived. Let's actually look at what the form looks like because it's very different. You can see a picture of it here on my blog post. So the information that was gathered previously would be on a row. And so you would just put a person's name and go across the row and answer the questions in little boxes. So the form changed to have all the information entered into columns for each person. And you can see that here. And also the forms were for one family. So previously you could see the people who were living next door to your ancestor pretty easily by looking up and down the census rows. Here, this form is just for one family. And so if you really wanted to see who was living next to your ancestor, you would have had to flip pretty far forward and far back in order to see who was living next to your ancestor. Up here at the top is where the address would have been. And then the columns would have started with the head of household as person 1 in column 1, and then worked to the right. And I'll show you a better example with actual data on it. So let's go to the statistical information, and that's on Wikipedia. And Wikipedia also has the questions that were asked and a few other tidbits of information. The most populous state, again, was New York, and the least populous was Nevada. And this was the first time that more than one city counted populations of over 1 million. So New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia had populations over 1 million. The controversy regarding the total population shows that there was only about a 25-26% total population increase in the entire United States. And people were kind of expecting what had happened before, 30 to 35%. And so there was a bit of concern that the tabulation machine was not counting properly. There was also some accusations that some cities may have manipulated the census by somehow causing an increase in population that didn't really exist. It's hard to say because most of the records now have been destroyed to go back and say, yes, it was counted properly or not. It's long past being able to fix that. So there's some information here in this article that talks about the count and the findings and the controversy and the availability of the data. And you can see the rankings of the states and also the cities. Okay, so let's go to an example of someone who's actually in the 1890 U.S. Census, and I had to look around to find somebody because I have not ever been able to find one of my own personal ancestors in the 1890 U.S. Census. So this person is somebody who's in Perryville, Perry, Alabama, which is one of the places that survived in Precinct 11. And his name is David Allen. He's born October 1828, and this birth information here says he was born in Georgia, but when we look at the census, it actually says he was born in Kentucky. So this may be something that needs to be corrected, and I'll show you why they put Georgia there. So let's scroll down. So here's the family. It's a rather large family. We have David and Amanda Allen, and then they have 9 children. And so 3 boys and 6 girls. And they appear to all have been born in Alabama. Let's go and look and see. You can see there's a record hand actually for the 1890 U.S. Census here. let's actually go and look at the census record itself. So this is just the record page for David Allen with the image here. So let's click on that. So here's the form. It's very similar to the one that I showed you before. You can see the page number in the upper right corner. Unfortunately, this does not have the street address. It just says Perrysville Beat number 11 in Perry County, Alabama. And then it has the enumeration district. But then you go to the columns and you can see here's David Allen Sr. And it is noted that his race is black, so there's a good chance that he was a previously enslaved person. He's quite a bit older than his wife. He's 62 and his wife is 50. And all of his children were born after the Civil War. So he would have been about 30 when the Civil War started. And then he didn't get married or start having children until 1870 almost. And also you can see here his birth location is Kentucky, and the birth locations for his mother and father are. So it's not really clear if he was formerly enslaved or not, for sure. I think a little bit more research needs to be done to find out, but very highly likely. And then as we go down, we can see that his profession is farmer. His wife is a housekeeper, and then his children are farm hands. It says, was he able to read or write? And the answer is no. But as you look at his children say yes. So his children were able to go to school and learn to read. And it even says here, this child, Tempe Jane, had actually been to school in the last 2 months. So that's interesting. And then you can see some of the other questions here about disability. It says the number of persons in the family is 11. Another interesting question here under Amanda, the wife, says mother of how many children and number of children living. It says she's the mother of 12 with only 9 living. So there are 3 children missing, and it's hard to say who those children are because they're just simply not listed. It may be worth trying to go and look for the 1870 and 1880 census to see if there are some other children. So this is the second page, so we have some additional children. We have Laura, Cynthia, Henry, Carrie, and Anna. And again, you know, it gives pretty much the same information, but we have some that are at school, some that are at home, some that have attended school recently, and some of these children can't read or write. So some of the children were able to go to school, maybe some of them weren't. And then the last child is on this page all by herself, Lucy, and she's 5 years old, and she's at home. So now if we wanted to see who was living next to the family, we would have to go forward or back. So if we go forward, we can see that there's another family, Alexander Washington and Amelia Washington, and their children. And there's 12 people in their family, so another very large family. Also possibly another previously enslaved person because they're black in Alabama. Hard to know for sure. That would require some more research. And then if we were to go forward, we can see some other families. So here's another family, and it looks like grandparents taking care of a granddaughter. Very interesting. It's a little bit more work to kind of figure out the connections of the friends, associates, and neighbors, but you can get quite a bit of information from these census records if you have your ancestors in one of the surviving records. Okay, so now there's one other thing I wanted to do for this family. You can see that this is a record hint that needs to be attached. And also, if we go and look at the sources, there's only 2 sources. So we have the 1880 and the 1900 census. And if we look at those, we can see it says here he was born in Kentucky in 1880. And the 1900 census says Georgia. So we would need to evaluate whether that's correct or not, because now we have 1880 and 1890 that both say Kentucky. And so a little bit more research needs to be done there, and I'm not going to make that change because this isn't my family, but I can attach this record to the family. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on the record hint and click on review and attach. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add the residence, and my reason statement is usually this record matches the family. And then I'll click attach, and that reason statement will be copied onto all the other family members. So I'm just going to go ahead and add the residence for 1890 and so on. So this might take a minute because there's quite a large family here. But it feels good to attach a record like this to a family that doesn't have much information. And the hope is that in time, as their descendants start looking for their ancestors, they'll see this and see that their family has some information. So that's why I sometimes like to do this, even though it's not my personal ancestors. So just a few more here, and then we'll be done. And as you're kind of going along, you can compare the information that's given. You know, she doesn't have a birth listed in the record, which I think she does. I have to go back and look and see if the age is there and just make sure that this birth year is correct. For whatever reason, she's out of order here, but let's go ahead and add her to the record. So let's go back to the family. So now all of those individuals in that family have an additional record. And so if you were to click on it, you can see now she has two sources. Tempe Jane has two sources. Thomas Allen has two sources. David Allen has three. So that's really good. Anyway, I hope that was helpful about the 1890 census. Don't just ignore it. Go and look and see if your ancestors could be in one of the surviving areas and just give it a chance. Thanks for watching.